Have you ever tried to make your own moss pole? In this video I'll be taking you step by step through how I made this moss pole using sphagnum moss, the materials that I've used, the costs, the benefits of making your own, and some environmental considerations to think about when using sphagnum moss. That way you can decide what's best for you and your plants. So the benefits of making your own moss poles are that you can save a lot of money by making them yourself. You can of course buy them online and in some specialist plant stores. However, when you buy them ready-made, you're really paying for the time it's taken for someone else to make them. So if you can make them yourself and you enjoy taking that time to create them, then all you need to buy are the materials, and it can be a really cost-effective way to make the poles and support your plants. It's really easy to adapt them to your plants as well. So you can make them to the exact size that you need. So if I was making one for this plant, for example, which it will need soon because it needs to have this stake swapped out, I'll probably make one slightly smaller than this, just so that it's got enough room to still grow a little bit further and remain supported, but it probably would need to be a little bit smaller. Or if you've got a really large plant, that's really where you might notice the cost savings if you can then make it yourself and make it to the exact height that you need. It's also a really relaxing activity just to get stuck in, and quite mindful when you're just focusing on putting all the pieces together. And it's also just really satisfying to see them when they're created and your plants are supported, and just knowing that you've made it yourself. So let's get started with making the moss bowl. There are a couple of different ways that you can do this in terms of what you use to hold the moss in place. So you can find plastic netting or plastic mesh that you can use, and then use a support pole such as dowling, and then wrap the moss around the pole with the plastic mesh that holds it in place against the pole. Alternatively, you can also use wire mesh, which I've got here. So I've got some quite rigid wire mesh here. This is about 1mm thick wire, and this should be sturdy enough to not need an additional support pole. So I should be able to fill this with moss, roll it up, and it will stay upright in place. So I can then use that as I'm potting up a plant with this. I can put it in and then put the soil around it to hold it in place. If I wanted it to be a little bit more sturdy, or if maybe it was a larger one, then I might put a support pole down the middle as well, such as a piece of dowling. So I've got the sphagnum moss here that we'll be using, and just to be clear, this is sphagnum moss, not peat moss. This does say that it is from a renewable source, which is good. So you can see that I'm wearing gloves. This is just because the moss exposure to the skin over a period of time can cause irritation if you've got sensitive skin. So do wear gloves if you need to protect your hands. There's also quite a lot of moisture in here too, so I'll wring that out too. I don't really want that all over my hands either. So I'll wring that out, and that will make it a little bit easier when we're putting the moss down to know how much we need when we make the moss pole. So just a quick safety note, if you are using the wire mesh, then it might be worth wearing gloves while you're cutting it and using it, as the edges can be quite sharp. The previous gloves I was wearing actually got cut up quite a bit. Thankfully not me, just the gloves. So I've got some different ones on now, bright yellow ones, but these are a bit thicker, so should protect me from these, but also they'll help with getting the moisture out of the moss. So I've put a sheet of plastic down on the work surface just to protect it from any of the moss that might fall through the mesh as we're putting it in. I imagine there will be quite a few bits that fall through, any smaller bits. So then hopefully we can also collect it up and reuse it for something else, so none of it goes to waste. I've got a dish for collecting the excess moisture, so while we wring the moss out, and some kitchen towel again, which I'll place it on there once wringing it out, and that'll collect up any last bits of that excess moisture, and then we can use it to create the pole. So let's get started with removing some of the moisture from the moss. So it'll still be quite moist when we use it, we just don't want it to be excessively wet, and I can already see there's quite a lot of moisture coming out of it. So I'm not sure if I've done enough. I think I'll leave it there, and we'll see how far this gets us with the length of mesh for the pole that we've got. As I said before, this is a lot more rigid than I was expecting, so I'm just going to bend it out a little bit just to put the moss in the middle, and then I'll bend it back in place. And I've cut enough just to overlap the ends. Maybe trying to fluff it up a little bit, because I've obviously squeezed it quite tightly to get the water out, and it's a good job that I put all the plastic down. As you can see, I'm already throwing the moss everywhere and making a mess. So this would need to be packed quite tightly or quite full, so that once it's all packed in there and it's secured, it doesn't sort of fall out either end. So now the sort of difficult bit, as this is quite rigid, I've just got to bend this back into place, and what I want to try and do is get the rough edge or the sharper edge of the wire where I'd cut it before underneath the other piece that had the finished edge. I've seen this done in a number of ways, so you can use a number of different methods to secure this. You can use cable ties. They are very secure and very easy to use, although bear in mind they are just throwaway plastic, although they'll be kept on this, but they are still throwaway plastic. Alternatively, you can use some sort of malleable wire or thin wire. I've got some standard floristry wire, which is really useful for these sorts of things and attaching plants to support poles. But I've also noticed that when this came in the packaging, it had some wire wrapped around it. So rather than let that go to waste, I'm just going to reuse that, and then that could be what will hold this together. So here's the wire. It's very thin, if you can see it on the camera. So now all I'm going to do is put this through some of these squares of the mesh just to hold it in place, and then I'll go down it with some additional wire and make sure that it is secure. So I'm just going to cross it over the width of a square and then diagonal as well, just to give it a good coverage, and then twist those together, and hopefully that will hold in place. And then the little sharper edges, I can either cut those down or actually even hook them underneath, a bit like a staple. So that's the finishing touches done to the moss pole. So I've gone down the edge of the pole with the same pieces of wire just to secure it in place, and I've twisted it in on itself and folded the sharp edges underneath so that they're inside the pole so they won't catch me or the plant. And then I've also, on the bottom of the pole, put a bit of wire across on either direction to prevent anything from falling out of the bottom of the pole as I'm moving it about or as I'm about to pot it up. And the good thing about that is it doesn't matter how neat that is, because that's going to be hidden in the soil anyway when it's potted up. I've left the top open anyway, because that's the bit that you'll see until obviously the plants grow up and over it. So there we go. That's the Sphagnum moss pole. So it's not used as much of the moss as I thought it would. As you can see, there's quite a lot of moss in there, and if you remember, there was quite a lot of moss left on the table as well from where I was taking out the excess moisture. There's also about half of it left in the bag still, so I could probably make another 2 of these of this size, which is really good value. I was expecting it to be more expensive, because on the face of it, it looks more expensive for the quantity that you get. So the Sphagnum moss I bought for £9.99 from a local garden centre for that size bag. Again, you can get it online for different prices and different quantities. The more you buy, I think obviously buying in volume, the more you buy, the greater the saving, so the less you pay overall. And the mesh was actually £6 for that roll, but I got it for 4 because it was on offer. The amount that I've used, maybe about a 1/6 or an 1/8 of the mesh that was available on that roll. So really, even at full price, that probably cost me conservatively 75p for the wire. So 75p for the wire, £3.33, a third of £10 for the moss, and that's just over £4. And one thing to note, this would of course be more expensive if it did have an additional support pole down the middle. So again, depending on what size you're making and what plant you have, and also what mesh that you're using, if it has a support pole, the cost of this would probably go up by about £2, maybe a little bit more. It depends really on the length of the pole that you're trying to make. So as I've not used a support pole in the middle, that's probably why this is the cheapest. If I were using a pole as well as, then it would come in as the most expensive. So I suppose it swings around about as to what materials you're using. If you use a good quality wire mesh, then you perhaps don't need the pole and it comes in cheaper. Now, I did mention there were some environmental considerations to think about when using sphagnum moss. There's a fantastic video by Epic Gardening that takes you through a really good explanation of exactly what sphagnum moss and sphagnum peat are, what their environmental impact is, as well as also covering coconut coir. So if that sounds of interest, then please do give that a watch. The link is in the description below. I hope you found this video useful in showing you how to make a moss pole using sphagnum moss. If you've made them before and you've got any tips or ideas on how you make them, then please do share them in the comments below to help others. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments too, and we'll respond to everyone. We've got another video coming up which will show you how to make some alternative plant support poles using coconut coir, hessian and jute. So that'll be out next week, so please do consider hitting the subscribe button and you'll be notified when that video is out, and you may find that useful too, so that you can support your plants. As always, thank you for watching. Grow your well-being.